Hi, and welcome to the Newbery Chronicles. This is a podcast where two readers go through every Newbery Medal winning book and then we talk about it. My name is Michael.
And I'm Rebecca.
And this time, we're in the 30s. The Great Depression is raging, and Elizabeth Coatsworth has written a book called The Cat Who Went to Heaven, and it won the Newbery Medal in 1931. So before that, just a quick reminder, you can leave us feedback at newberychronicles@gmail.com if you think that you have something to say to us, and we'll try to respond to you. We'll try to be kind. We'll keep the expletives to a minimum. The other thing we need to do before we talk about The Cat Who Went to Heaven is talk about books that we have recently read. Rebecca, would you like to go first?
Sure. I read a nonfiction book called Braiding Sweetgrass, and the subtitle is Indigenous Women, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants, and it is by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This was a very good book. Not a book that would have been on my radar, except we had some people over to dinner from our church, and they suggested it to me, and it was very good.
Church people, they sometimes got good book recommendations.
They do. This book follows, sorry guys,
Our
dishwasher sang a little song for us. Robin Wall Kimmerer, I don't really know how you say her last name, but anyway, she is a naturalist and also a scientist, and she is an Indigenous woman. And so this whole book is really talking about the beauty of plants, both in nature but also scientifically, and also exploring how, as an Indigenous woman, it was really hard for her to find her way in the scientific realm. Not because she wasn't good at science or didn't understand the material, but people, men specifically, did not take her seriously, especially when she's bringing her historical and cultural understanding of what the earth means for us as humans, and what we can do for the earth and to the earth to take care of it. And I really appreciated her perspective on, she spent some time talking about, as a professor, how she would talk with her kids that were environmentalists, and how they really could not recognize a way that mankind could benefit the planet, could only identify ways that they have harmed the planet, which is fair, but she spends time just unpacking, like in her cultural understanding growing up and as an Indigenous woman, recognizing that we can take care of the earth and do so well. And I just really love how she wove together her stories, both personal and those that she grew up with in her tradition, and also weaving that all in together with science and the workings of the natural world. I thought it was really beautiful. So that was a good book. It was well worth the read.
I wish I liked gardening better. I feel like
I know
it's a character flaw, and also when our food system collapses,
right.
I'm going to need those growing skills for our family starves.
I feel that way too. The reason why these friends recommended this book to me is because of another book I've talked about on this podcast called Soil. I think that the subtitle is A Black Mother's Guide to Gardening. And I am not a gardener, but I got a lot out of both of these books anyway. But also, I am always well aware of my ignorance in this area and just my lack of skills whenever I read books like this. So it's good for me to read because it wouldn't naturally be on my radar, and it has a lot to say about society and the world in that. But yes, I agree with you. I also finished the 5th book in the Inspector Gamache series by Louise Penny. That book is called The Brutal Telling. And I'm not going to tell a lot about this book because I don't want to give spoilers away. And Michael's parents are also reading these books, and I'm a little bit ahead of them, so I'm really ready for them to finish this one so that we can talk about it. But yeah, the Inspector Gamache series is really great. A friend of mine also recommended them to me, and they're just really fun. Each one is a murder mystery set in this beautiful town, beautiful except that people keep getting murdered. But this beautiful town in
Canada.
Yes, in Canada. And your dad and I were talking about how every time we read these books, we just get really hungry because they always meet at this lovely bistro where they have these just intricate, beautiful meals, and they're like cozy murder mysteries. Are these books? So they're. I always feel like I want some wine and cheese and a crusty bit of bread as I listen to them. Like that's a way that people describe good bread.
Is it?
Like that goes with soup, like a crusty bread.
Oh, okay.
This is a thing. Anyway.
I believe you.
That book was really good. I could not believe the ending. And so I made the mistake of looking up the ending to make sure that I understood what happened. And I accidentally gave myself a spoiler in the next book. So I'm a little bit disappointed in that.
Well, I'm sorry. It's weird that they would have a spoiler for the next book in the description of the previous one.
It's because it ties into the end of this one.
Oh, the unbelievable ending.
Right. So,
can't believe they would do that.
I also read, finally, after being on a wait list for almost a year, I finally read Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. And it is everything that people have described, except nobody really described it to me. They just said it's really good and it's really intense. But it's incredibly good. She won the Pulitzer for this. She co-won it with somebody else. Somebody else wrote a book and they, tied. What are you doing?
I'm just looking at the lights.
Michael's distracting me.
I'm not meaning to distract.
This book is set in rural Appalachia and really untangles these experiences of different people, but mainly the protagonist who goes by Demon, and just exploring what substance use and drugs, specifically opioids, have done to Appalachian communities. And I thought it was very artfully done, wonderful story. I just started reading Barbara Kingsolver this last year, and this one is by far her best that I've read. I have not read Poisonwood Bible, which she was her most popular book, I feel like, before this one. And
might still be her most popular book.
She was nominated for the Pulitzer, but did not win for that one. And she did win for this one, and she deserves it. The only complaint that I have is that I did not like the voice of the person reading in the audiobook, but that is, which I have also complained about her other books, because normally she reads them, and I don't like her reading voice.
She needs to, her publisher needs to step up their game audiobook-wise.
Maybe I just need to read the physical copies is the answer. Also, I read Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis, which I was also on a long wait list for that. And guys, it was meh. I don't know why people like it so much. It was fine, but that was all I can say. It's just fine. It's about this mom who is a scientist and is not taken, set in the 60s. She's not taken seriously at all as a scientist because she is a woman. There's a love affair with this, not even affair because he wasn't married, but there's a love story with another scientist in the book, and then she ends up having a cooking show.
What?
Because
I was not expecting that to happen.
Well, it's like a really roundabout way, but she does not want to be seen as like just this woman who cooks, like this housewife who cooks. So her whole cooking show is like a science show. So she's explaining to the women all the mechanics of like the food. And it makes me think of your dad, honestly, how he talks about cooking.
Yeah. Well, and he really liked that guy. Hold on, keep talking. I can't remember.
Yeah. So it was fun. I do, when I'm cooking now, I think about how would the protagonist explain what I'm doing and at what temperature it needs to be to do its thing. So anyway, it was fine. It was just fine. I don't really get the hype because I don't think I love the tone of the book. It's not like my type of book. It's kind of snarky, but also like criticizing. So it's like snarky and kind of silly, but also serious. And I just feel like I couldn't really get the heart of what of the tone, really. I had no problem with the story or the message or anything like that. I think it's just like the plot ended up being pretty predictable to me and kind of like just satisfying ways, I'll say.
Alton Brown is the guy I was trying to
Okay.
think about, who I'm just now realizing on Wikipedia is also a cinematographer who shot an REM music video that I've seen. That was his big break, The One I Love.
The last book I know I've been talking for a long time. I feel like we're tired and we're kind of rambling, so
It's only been 10 minutes, Rebecca. We've gone...
that's long for me
long
to talk
time
about
on-
the books I've read. But anyway,
on this section.
the last one I have is Truth and Beauty, A Friendship by Ann Patchett. You guys, I have fallen in love with Ann Patchett. She's absolutely brilliant. This book is a nonfiction story, a nonfiction portrayal of her friendship with Lucy Greeley, who was another famous poet who died, and so this is chronicling their friendship and just her life, and it was incredibly wonderful. I wasn't sure how well Ann Patchett would do with the nonfiction because I've only read her fiction, and it's just top notch, superb, wonderful. This book also made me very sad, so don't read it if you don't want to be sad. So that's what I read. What did you read?
I've read a few books. Only one of them is sad. So I read The Eyes of the Dragon by Stephen King. I really like Stephen King, but I hadn't read a book of his in a while. And this book kept being imperiled in our house because there's a dragon on the front, and so I think the kids thought it was fun. And so they
One
would always...
kid in particular.
Yeah, but multiple kids at different times, and they would always pull it off the shelf, and I had to tape the cover back on multiple times. So I thought, I gotta finally read this book before this is no more. And it's kind of a departure for Stephen King, especially at the time. It was written in the early 80s, I think. And it's like a high fantasy, kind of like a far cry from like a lot of the like horror and modern fiction that he was doing at the time. And I think since he's kind of diversified his genre, associations beyond just like a horror guy. But I think at the time it was a pretty big departure. And he apparently wrote it because he wanted a book that his kids would like to read. And it's basically this story about this kingdom, and there's this evil magic wizard who's like who manipulates the royal family, and evil magic wizard. I'm also tired. I'm redundant right now.
Yeah, it's late, guys. I'm sorry.
And anyway, this wizard doesn't really want power. He does want power, but mostly he just wants to cause chaos, and he just likes seeing things spiral into, awful situations. And so he creates this elaborate plot to make sure that this kingdom fails in the bloody revolution by delegitimizing the monarchy, which normally I would, be a fan of, but this guy's not so good in this book. So he murders the king and frames the son who was going to be the heir and is kind of groomed to be the heir, and everyone seems to really love. He frames him for the murder, leaving the second son, who's been kind of like a screw up and hasn't really had his sights on the throne and is ill prepared for the throne. So he becomes king instead of his brother, who is then sent away into this tower, and locked away forever and all this sort of stuff. And so then it's trying to figure out, how are they going to undo this so that the kingdom doesn't fall apart. And I thought it was fun. It was pleasant. It's the first time that I remember. Stephen King does a lot of interconnected stuff in his books, where a character from one of his other books will show up, or they'll reference something from one story in another story. And a lot of that's done through Maine. All of his stories, or a lot of his stories, are set in Maine, and so they'll reference different locations and stuff. But this story is, of course, not set in Maine. It's set in some fictional, kingdom. But the magician's name is Flag, which is also the villain's name in The Stand. And so that was kind of interesting. I think it's an early example of the kind of, connectivity that he would go into a lot more heavily later on by the 90s. So that was good. I also read, Rebecca got me this book, and it had been on my radar. It's this book called The Mysteries, and it was written by Bill Watterson, the cartoonist behind Calvin and Hobbes. and illustrated by Bill Watterson and this guy named John Catch. I don't know what was illustrated by what. My guess is that Bill Watterson did the backgrounds, and John Catch did like the people characters in the illustrations, because I was reading up on him and he's like a caricature artist. But it's a very big departure from Calvin and Hobbes in terms of tone and stuff. It's all this black and white, really like, stark illustrations, and it's basically this little fable about how people will try to control the world, but in doing so kind of spell their own doom. And so it's kind of like a dark fantasy sort of thing. It's very short. I read it in a few minutes. It's a picture book, but it's like a picture book for adults. And I probably wouldn't have ever thought about it except that it was connected to Bill Watterson. And he's such a recluse these days, and only occasionally actually does work that people see anymore. And it's always good to have him show up. And it does feel kind of a piece with some of the more like philosophically or environmentally bent, like Calvin and Hobbes stuff that he would occasionally venture into. Anyway, I enjoyed that. And then right now, the sad book I'm reading is I'm about a third of the way into a book called 10 Myths About Israel by, I looked up this guy's name, Ilan Pappé. Anyway, he's a scholar. He's a Jewish scholar in Israel, and he's very upfront in the introduction that he is writing a book to be anti-Zionist, and basically views like Zionism is based on a bunch of myths that don't actually reflect like the history of Israel-Palestine and all of the relationships between those two areas. And so the book is structured around 10, like what he views as like 10 myths that have allowed Zionism to kind of prop up Israel into this kind of colonialist project that has been very harmful to a lot of Palestinians. So it's not super happy, but it's good to read, good to know, especially if you don't really know a lot about that area, which is the case for myself. And I've mostly just kind of absorbed stuff ambiently over the years. Anyway, so that's what I've read. This time I actually spent less time talking about my books than you did.
I took too long.
You didn't take too long. You took just the right amount of time. Because we don't have a lot to say about it. I don't think we have a lot. I will say, The Cat Who Went to Heaven, our transition. We're not talking about The Cat Who Went to Heaven. We both read this book weeks ago, but we've been sick a lot, and there's just been a lot going on, and we kept meaning to have this podcast recording, and just now was the first time that we've actually done it. And so not only is this a small, short book, and not only did we read it several weeks ago, but I don't even think several weeks ago we had that much to say about it.
No, we didn't. But let me start by talking about the author, Elizabeth Coatsworth. She was born on May 31st, 1893, and beyond just winning the Newbery for this book, in 1968 she was the runner-up for the Hans Christian Andersen Award. Her father was a grain merchant, a prosperous grain merchant.
You don't get a name like Coatsworth and not become a prosperous merchant.
In Buffalo, New York. She attended Buffalo Seminary, which was a private girls' school there.
Was it a seminary?
I feel like it's one of those holdovers from like religious institutions being the one to like start schools and stuff.
Oh, okay. So she was not, at one point, like I think last episode you mentioned that she was a missionary.
That was incorrect. Oh, okay. That was about another author who wrote The Young Fu of the Upper, remember that book? Of the Upper.
Yeah. We'll get to it eventually.
That is the missionary. And so I confused these two. She traveled a lot as a child. When she was 5, she had already gone to the Alps and to Egypt. Like her family, I think
I guess you don't become a wealthy merchant without making a little bit of a world travel.
Yes. She graduated from Vassar in 1915, and Wikipedia says she graduated with her master's from Columbia in 1916. But I looked this up because I knew a lot of Ivy Leagues didn't accept women until like the 60s. Columbia, you guys, did not admit women until 1981.
Wow.
Now, however, as with many of these Ivy League institutions, they had women's colleges and often would let women attend courses in the main. So I
Well, how
looked it up.
magnanimous of them.
There was a women's college, there still is, called Barnard, which is
I've heard of that, actually.
affiliated with, it's like, it started out separate from Columbia, but now they have joined. Greta Gerwig graduated from there.
That's probably
And
how I
many
heard
other
about
people,
it.
many other people. But regardless, I was wondering if she graduated from there, but she didn't. So I don't know what Wikipedia is talking about. Or
As a teacher, I feel
knows?
like I must break out the old chestnut of
who knows?
anyone can edit Wikipedia.
That's true. Regardless, Elizabeth did well in her life. As an adult, she traveled to Eastern Asia and rode on horseback through the Philippines. She explored Indonesia and China, and she also slept in a Buddhist monastery. And so all of those experiences were heavy influencers on this book, The Cat Who Went to Heaven, which she wrote. She actually began her career publishing poetry in magazines. Her first children's book was The Cat and the Captain.
She likes
So we
cats.
see a theme. She also likes dogs. She wrote a lot of children's books, and she wrote books for adults, which I'll talk about.
Do they have animals in them?
Some of them. In 1929, she married writer and naturalist Henry Beston. I did not know who that was.
Nor I.
He wrote a famous book, something about the house. I don't remember what it's called.
Oh, that house book.
They had 2 daughters, Margaret and Catherine. They lived in Ingham, Massachusetts, and Chimney Farm, Maine. She wrote a collection of books for adults called The Incredible Tales in the 50s, and those books tell the story of a family living in the forests of northern Maine who may not be entirely human. So
What's the rest of them? Cats?
I don't know. It sounded intriguing. But she published over 90 books from 1910 to 1976, and one of them was her own autobiography.
We gotta read it. Maybe she herself claims to have graduated from Columbia. Maybe
I don't know. I
she's
should go read it.
a woman spinning her own story.
I don't know. Her daughter, Catherine, who what I think was better known as Kate Barnes, she also wrote, and she was named the first poet laureate of Maine.
Wow.
That was cool. And then Elizabeth died at her Nobleboro home, which was in Maine, on August 31st, 1986.
She had 5 years to have enrolled in Columbia.
She did. Maybe
So
that's
maybe
when she
it
got
was
her
like-
master's.
Maybe grad school
No,
killed
'cause
her.
it said in 1916. Anyway, I don't know. It was just interesting to me because I was going to be really surprised if Columbia was accepting women at that point in time. So, over to you. Tell us about this book.
So, this book, The Cat Who Went to Heaven, is about a painter, an artist, and his housekeeper. The painter is the artist is a starving artist. He's very poor, but somehow can afford to live in help. So I'm not sure how that works. But anyway, he becomes commissioned by a local Buddhist monastery to make a mural in the monastery. And the mural is supposed to encapsulate the life of the Buddha and be kind of symbolically connected with his teachings. And so the book is structured around each chapter. The artist is planning or painting part of this mural and imagining himself in the story as part of his creative process. And so it's basically retelling a bunch of these. I'm assuming they're retold stories. Like they have the feeling of like folk tales or like parables from Buddhism. And I am not familiar enough with Buddhism to know if these are creative retellings or if these are fairly standard stories or what. But that's the majority of the book. And the cat in the title comes in because the housekeeper brings in this cat at the beginning of the story. It's like a stray or something. And the cat kind of gets a reaction to each painting. The painter will look to the cat and think like, what does this cat think about this painting? And kind of imagines what the cat would be thinking. Apparently, and again, I don't know how much this is, standard Buddhist doctrine, or if this is just a conceit of this book or what. But apparently, the cats are not allowed into heaven in Buddhism for reasons that I'm not exactly sure about. But not to spoil anything, but this cat does get to go to heaven. And by the end of the book, the cat has made it into the painting in the lap of the Buddha. So there's a sort of, I don't know if redemption is the right word, but a sort of, the cat is redeemed throughout the course of the book and eventually grafted into the pantheon of animals who are in service of the Buddha. So I don't know. Do you think I covered that?
I do want to talk a little bit more about cats. The way that it's portrayed in this book is that cats are seen as like these very unholy creatures, like they're devils.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stories of Buddha honor other animals, and the cat is never honored. And there was a story about the cats that explained that a little bit, and I'm trying to find it. But as I'm finding it, this cat, the real life cat, is very pious.
It is a very pious cat.
This cat is very like at one point they tempt it with a bird or something, or a bird comes in the house and he doesn't harm the bird. He is very careful. It's almost like the cat has human characteristics.
Right.
And so the cat is also lucky because it had 3 colors. Its white coat actually has 3 colors, which is considered lucky, which is why the housekeeper brings the cat home. Feels like the house is lonely, thinks his cat is lucky, brings it home, and the painter is very turned off by this cat in the beginning. And the cat, as it's looking at each picture, grows sadder and sadder as it realizes that all these other animals are welcomed by the Buddha except for him. And so when the painter finally draws the cat in the picture, the people that commissioned him to paint it originally rejected it. And they said, no, you can't have this cat in this painting. Like, this is not going to work. But then the next morning,
there's been a miracle.
The picture has changed.
And the Buddha is holding the cat, right?
And the cat, when it finally sees that the artist has painted him in the picture, it is so happy. Its whole life is fulfilled, and it dies.
It just drops dead on the spot, which I was shocked by. I was shook by the cat dropping dead in the last pages of this book.
And then the next day, it's as if the Buddha has. And so everyone realizes that this creature is actually holy and really, it is redeemed. Like the cat in itself is a redeemable creature.
One more thing I'll say about the kind of format of this book is that at the end of each chapter, we get a poem that is apparently written by the housekeeper. And so you get kind of like this. It is really a book that has a pretty unique and creative shape, because you have the kind of narrative of like the housekeeper and the painter and they're kind of fairly realistic dealings with poverty and whatever, and then you have a layer on top of that, which is the layer of these fables and parables, and then on top of that, or I guess next to that, you have these breaks that have poetry in them, and I don't know, like I was not expecting this kind of format breaking book. I don't know what I expected out of this book, but it is pretty serious-minded and interested in playing around with form, and I don't know. There's also illustrations. It's not a long book. It's including illustrations. It's probably like 50 pages or something like that. So Rebecca, what did you like about this book?
I love the illustrations. I thought they were very nice. They're very pretty. They're simple, but they're pretty. I also like the idea of the everyone being redeemed by the end of the book, and the idea of like this cursed creature not being beyond redemption. And I thought that was a beautiful ending to it. I also thought this is an interesting way to learn about the Buddha's life, especially if you're a kid. Well, I don't know, not even especially if you're a kid. I think it's a fun way if you're going to tell the history of like a religious figure to tell it in these little stories. So I thought the framework was good for that. What did you like?
Mostly the thing I liked was I know like the very basic things about Buddhism. Like I know about, you know, Siddhartha going on his little quest and achieving enlightenment and becoming the Buddha. I know about like the four pillars of Buddhism or whatever. I know about those things. Beyond that, basically nothing. I know, and so I did enjoy learning about this, and I thought it was a pretty approachable way to show the kind of principles of Buddhism, and so I was interested in that. And like I said earlier, like the format of the book is pretty unconventional, and I thought that ended up being interesting. It's not really doing anything esoteric or difficult like these sorts of books, but it did kind of remind me of like modernist literature at the time, you know, like James Joyce or Virginia Woolf or something, in the sense of it kind of playing around with format. And that's only a tenuous connection that I don't even know if this author intended, because it's not stream of consciousness or anything like that. But it is a book that is not really content to be simply a novel or simply a picture book or simply a book of poetry or whatever it is. It is pushing into something that's a little bit different than that. Mm-hmm. And I did enjoy that. So yeah, that's what I enjoyed.
Looking back, one of the reasons why the cat is like condemned is because of its pride and sense of superiority, and that it refused to bow to Buddha.
You know, word. I think cats need to be taken down a notch. I forgot about that. Yeah.
So anyway, that's one of the reasons behind. I also forgot, y'all. We forgot that this cat's name is Good Fortune. Did you remember that?
But they name it Good Fortune because it's lucky, like you mentioned.
Yeah. What I disliked, I found this book to be kind of boring.
It was boring.
With that, I don't really have much to say beyond that. And I also had the question of how he affords a housekeeper.
Yeah, I don't know. I have this question in a lot of books, and I'm not sure if things just work differently back then, or if authors just are kind of blinded by their privileged backgrounds. But it's like not uncommon in older books for people to be living in what appears to be fairly austere conditions of poverty and have servants. And I'm not sure how that works. Maybe it's one of these situations where they're not really paying the servant, they're simply allowing them to live in their house, or I don't know what, but I had questions about that myself, because it goes out of its way to talk about how poor this artist is. I think what I disliked about it, it's not, like I said, it's not particularly interesting outside of the things that you learn about Buddhism through it. And it does very much have like the kind of tone of like something that's kind of either devotional or educational or didactic, with regards to the teachings, whether you're kind of like an outsider just learning about the teachings, or, you know, I don't know how faithful this is to like actual Buddhist teachings, but like I can imagine like Christianity, which I'm more familiar with, I can imagine a book like this about a painter painting the life of Jesus in the wall of a church, and it being very boring because it's all the stories that we know from the Bible, like, you know, the healing of the lepers and the feeding the 5,000 or whatever. Like I can imagine that being very prosaic and uninteresting, and it being a story just to teach children these kind of like theological stories. And there's obviously a time and a place for those things, but in terms of me as an adult just reading about it, it wasn't particularly engaging. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, good to, you know, dip my toe into the Buddhist tradition. Rebecca just
Sorry,
knocked
guys.
one of our son's toys off of the table. But I think were I to actually sit down and want to learn about Buddhist teachings, I probably wouldn't like this format. I probably would choose, an article or a book that's more nonfiction.
Yeah.
Much as like I said, I was kind of intrigued by the format and everything.
Yeah. Well, thumbs up or thumbs down?
I don't know. Like it's like thumbs meh, thumbs middle, because there's nothing I strongly dislike about it. There's nothing wrong with it, quote unquote. But
In terms of me enjoying it and recommending it to other people, I give it a thumbs down.
yeah, I'm gonna thumbs down. But it's like thumbs down because I think it just was not for me. Like,
Right.
I can imagine a world in which this appeals to somebody.
Right.
But it was not something that appealed to me very much
Right.
outside of the small things I've already talked
Yeah,
about.
I agree.
So
Next time,
that's it. Next time we're in the 1940s. And what's the book
you
that we're
guys,
reading next
it's
time?
really dismal. I feel like the 1920s through the 40s is just dismal in terms of the book.
Truly is. Also, one of the things we realized in the 1940s is it is dominated by historical fiction
And dolls.
and dolls. Yeah, multiple
And
stories.
sometimes
about
dolls telling historical fiction. Like,
So-
they're the ones to tell you the story.
The doll that we are going to be reading about next time is Miss Hickory, which won the Newbery Medal in 1947. And this is a novel in which the protagonist is a doll named Miss Hickory, made from a forked twig from an apple tree and a hickory nut for her head, hence her name. This is the Wikipedia page.
Right.
This podcast brought to you by Wikipedia. Anyway, we'll see. We'll see how that is.
Yep. Thanks for listening to us, guys, as we are tired and rambling.
Tired and rambling, and talked about the book as about as much as we talked about the other books that we read.
Which were more interesting.
Yeah, it's a slim volume, The Cat Who Went to Heaven. I don't really begrudge us not talking about it a lot. So anyway, I appreciate all of our listeners, and catch you next time with the 1940s doll.
Thanks for listening.